So you have 15% weightage to this one. This is a little lengthy topic, but not very complicated also. A lot of questions are there. Right. Market risk. So if you can recall some of our conversations earlier, we discussed that those days, most of the risks were categorized into credit risk or operational risk on those basic risk categories, and everything else was inside those broader categories. But lately, there were different analysis and digging into details, and then realized that there are different types of risk elements inside those broader categories. And that's how these next level of risk categorization has come into the picture. You have this market risk, liquidity risk, and all other risk factors coming into the picture. So market risk, in very simple terms, is the price uncertainty. So we are looking at the price aspect. So any risk that we talk about, the price, you can simply consider them as market risk. That's the easiest way to remember this, right? Due to the pricing or the movements in prices, the bank or the financial institution can face risk. Now, there is an interesting thing in this market risk aspect, because we talk about the price uncertainty. So the price uncertainty is always there in the market when you deal with instruments and various products. And the risk related to that price uncertainty is market risk. And that is the very drive for the market operations. Because if everyone is aware about the exact prices, if everyone knows what the exact price is, I don't think there is such a competitive market. Because there is uncertainty, different people make different predictions about the price movements. Different people look at the prices differently. Different people have different tolerance levels. That is why this market operation takes place. If everyone believes in one price, and if everyone believes in same way of looking at risk, probably there won't be a market, competitive market, as what we say. So those are the two sides of it. This price uncertainty is a key driving force of market activity, and at the same time, it gives you a risk element. Now, remember, when we talk about the risk, it is always about the future, right? So the future price movements, the future losses that an organization may face or incur. That's what we look at. Now, here is an interesting thing. When you look at in the market risk part, in the context of financial services, the risk of losses arising from changes in value of financial instruments, because in the financial services industry, we talk about financial instruments. We don't sell other commodities. We only look at financial instruments in the financial services industry. So therefore, if you are to define it, you have to define it in the context we are dealing with it. Right. Then, here's another interesting aspect about the market risk. Market risk has subcategories or the types all these types are part of market risk. It is volatility risk, market liquidity risk, currency risk, basis risk, interest rate risk, commodity price risk, and equity price risk. So as you can see, there are 7 categories, 7 types. It's very important to remember these 7 types because at the exam, there are questions on this. Sometimes there are questions about these subcategories or types, and you should remember that this category belongs to market risk, right? Okay, let's move. Volatility risk. So volatility risk is the risk of price movements that are more uncertain than usual. That means if you know the movements of prices that are, sometimes it can be a pattern, right? So one up, one down, one up, one down. So that is usual probably, right? So usual movements, predictable, you can understand and you're prepared. But the volatility risk comes when there can be unusual, right? Or they are uncertain. You cannot simply predict those price movements. What happens is that when there is price volatility, the price of the security or the share can vary drastically, which means when the volatility is high, the risk is also high. When the risk is high in terms of market price of shares, options, what are options? Options are derivatives. These options are used to mitigate certain risks embedded in the underlying instrument. So if the underlying instrument is a share, you use options to mitigate the risk of share price movement. So this option as a risk mitigation tool is available in the market. You can separately purchase them. Once you buy an option, it might give you certain immunities, some protection for price movements. So what this second point is trying to explain you is, if the volatility risk is high, that means there can be high level of price fluctuations in the share price. When the risk is high, naturally, the cost of your mitigating tool is also going up, because then the option prices go up because it is now trying to cover an instrument with a greater risk. Then we have market liquidity risk. That is, in very simple terms, the inability to sell your instrument in the market when you want to sell. That means there is no market activity, right? Or less activity. Sometimes we talk about liquidity in the share market. Sometimes we say we have a liquid share market. Sometimes we say we have less liquid share market. The liquidity is low. That means there aren't many transactions taking place. So there aren't adequate opportunities for people to buy and sell instruments. So when there is less liquidity, that increases the risk of loss, because when there is less activity, the players try to compromise on the prices and try to make a deal. As a result, if you want to sell your instrument, probably you'll end up selling it at a lower price than what you otherwise would do. Right? So this can happen when you don't have adequate players in the market. Then we have an example for that. Now, let's say here the example is a property. So you purchase a property to rent. So what happens? When you don't have adequate people to buy it, you tend to even give it at a low price. So you are taking a risk on pricing. And on the other side, when there's less liquidity, less market or low market for a property like that, even the banks might be reluctant to offer a loan for that kind of a facility. Right? You are reluctant to mortgage that kind of facility and offer a loan, because you're also not sure whether the party can sell that asset. Then we have the currency risk. So currency risk is predominantly coming from the exchange risk or exchange rate movements. Right? So this currency risk is there only when you have multiple currencies involved in this situation. So when you have certain instruments that are in different currencies than your dominant currency, then you have the currency risk. So especially when you deal with crypto assets. What are crypto assets? Crypto assets are, in layman's language, internet money, right? The money you find in cyber space, right? So you have bitcoins and various other currencies. Because these currencies, you have to first get into a normal dominant currency, and then you can switch into these currencies. And these currencies, the prices of those currencies are also a function of how the rest of the currencies behave and the availability. Then we have basis risk. So basis risk is mostly to do with hedging. What is hedging? Does anyone know what hedging is? How you explain hedging? This was a popular topic some time ago in Sri Lankan market. Everyone knew what hedging was. Everyone knew the word hedging, but I don't think everyone knew what hedging actually means. What is that? So hedging is, in very simple terms, a mechanism to mitigate a financial loss occurring from one transaction by having another transaction or a position. It, in very simple terms, let's say I have dollar borrowings. I have dollar borrowings, then I have a risk What is that? By the time I repay the loan, I need to convert rupees into dollars. Then I might be exposed to exchange risk where I end up paying a higher amount than what I used to buy or that I bought because of the exchange rate movement. So I'm exposed to the currency risk. So to mitigate that, I can have another investment in dollars. So what happens is, if the exchange rates goes up, I'm going to lose on my borrowing because I have to pay extra for my borrower because the rate has gone up. So I have to pay more rupees. And in that situation, my investment in dollars will also give me more rupees. So the loss I'm going to incur on one side, I'm covering from the other side. That is hedging in very simple terms. Right? So the basis risk is, when you do a hedging like that, you are creating two offsetting positions, right? You create one and you have another to offset that. But if that is not identical, when that is not identical, you are exposed to basis risk. Say, for example, I have a dollar borrowing. To mitigate that, I have a investment in pounds or euros, not in the dollars. So I know mostly these currencies move in similar directions. So if I lose on dollar borrowing, I'm going to gain on my euro or sterling pound investment. But because they are not identical to each other, because the movement in euro is not the same as dollars, you may not be able to cover the risk 100% because there can be a gap. So that is called the basis risk. So when your hedging instruments are not identical to each other in mitigating risk, there is a gap that you cannot fill, and that is called the basis risk. Right. Now here is an example of a currency risk. I think I don't need to explain in detail. You all can understand what it means. It says, so you want a UK investor purchase equity in dollars. Which gives you 10%. Then if the exchange rate causes a loss to your currency, the return is only 2% because 8% is eaten up by the currency risk. And then you are left with only 2% as an return. You can calculate and see in the different way if you want. Then we have the interest rate risk. So this is very, very straightforward, and we all know what interest rate risk is about. So here what we are looking at is, due to adverse movement in interest, how you lose. Now, this interest rate risk is mostly there for fixed products, fixed rate products. Right? So let's say you lend a loan to a customer at 10% for 10 years. And then with the market movement, the interest rates can go up. So now the standard interest rate could be 12%. But because you have locked up with the other guy for 10%, you are losing 2%. That is interest rate risk. So I will not spend time in explaining all these examples, but you all can understand. Right, this is about short term, long term. So this example talks about how this interest rate scenario need to be interpreted in a situation like this, in a bond. Then we have another risk connected to market risk, that is called commodity price risk. So you know what commodities are. That is simply when you have price movements in commodities. Now, when you say commodity in the financial industry, it is not necessarily the type of groceries that we go and buy in the market, but these are also an instrument that we use to deal with each other for investment purpose, etc. So this can include gold, right? This can include gold. Gold is a commodity. This can include sugar, flour, right? Likewise, there are wheat, rice. So these are some of the commodities that are available in the financial market when they derive derivatives or other financial instruments. So what happens is, when it comes to commodity pricing, according to the book, there are two fundamental areas or aspects that affect the commodity pricing. One is the market liquidity, that is the availability of adequate suppliers and buyers. So if you have less number of commodities in the market, there is a potential for a price hike because there'll be more demand. Right? That's how the liquidity works. Demand and supply works. And the other aspect is commodities are physical objects, goods, unlike other financial instruments that we can even have electronic versions. So these are physical goods. So when you're dealing with them, you would also look at the storage, right? Storage and the cost of handling them. Because you need warehouse, you need logistics, transportation, and various other things. You need security, you need people to deal with it, you need all other things that are required to manage commodities. So that's another area. Then equity price risk. So equity price risk is connected to equity. That is basically marketable securities that are available in the stock market mostly. So when someone invests in equity or share capital, they have different motives or different options to earn income. So broadly, there are two modes. One is the capital appreciation, no capital growth. Right? When the share prices go up and higher than the price the investor has bought it, there is a gain there. So that is what we are looking at as capital growth, that is increase in the share price. The second aspect of equity is dividend. Right? When you hold shares of particular companies, you get dividends. So these are the two income or return coming from equity: capital appreciation or capital growth, and dividend income. Now, if you look at these two aspects of revenue, the investment in equity can face these issues. So it can affect the capital, because you run out of cash when you invest there and lose, and then for the income as well. Then we have something called boundary issues. That means there are certain risk elements that are little gray, I must say. Right? That means there can be interconnections. There can be certain risks that will feed into other risk categories or types. Right? So here are the examples. Liquidity risk could be caused by a lack of supply and demand, which also cause price level risk. Right? So due to lack supply and demand, you may have liquidity risk. But the same reasoning is true when it comes to price level risk. Then again, increase in volatility risk have an impact on price level risk. Then interest rate risk. So the interest rate risk can have an indirect impact on the market and the market price. So likewise, you can have one category of stress that might go and connect with another category. So as a result, it is not easy to pinpoint or clearly identify which factors cause different risks. Right. Then we talk about market risk management. How do we manage market risk? Now, when we look at market risk management, there's a question. That's a question here. You have sent it privately. Yeah? You haven't shared it. Let me first read out the question. The question is, cap or flow not fixing properly in hedging instrument can be considered as basis risk. Cap or flow is different. So cap or flow, what happens is it also can have a connection to that. But what we mean by a cap flow is you are defining the extent to which the hedging agreement covers. That is something that we discussed even in the oil hedging story as well. We had a cap, not a flow, right? So when you define that limit, upper limit and the lower limit, so the responsibility on the party who is compensating for volatility will be within that range. If the movement goes beyond that, then you are not compensating it. So that will give some kind of a range to indicate what is the scope covered by this. But basis risk is not necessarily that. That is basically to let you know what is the gap between the movement or the impact of the hedging instrument and the underlying asset. So this in hedging terms, we also call it efficiency. If the hedging is efficient, there will be 100% coverage. That means the volatility is 100% covered. If it is not efficient or semi-efficient, the risk is not 100% covered. So the same thing is here. If your underlying instrument and the hedging instrument, they work in the opposite direction, that's how you manage the risk. But if they are not identical, or if they are not perfectly negative, the perfect negative correlation should be there to make it fully efficient. But if you have gap in those, you have an exposure. There's a part that is not covered. That is what we capture under basis risk. But capital flow might also have a role to play, but it is not exactly what we mean here. Right, let me get back to the market risk. Right. So when we look at market risk management, we are looking at different techniques. I just explained what hedging is, right? In simple terms, you are creating another position or acquiring another asset that has offsetting positions, right? So when I was doing this lecture in a class, someone was not very clear, right? However much I explained, not clear, and wanted me to explain it in a layman language, in a very basic level. Hedging is there not to earn profit or anything, it's just to cover the risk. Look at it that way. The best example I can give, let's say there is a cricket match between Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. When there is a cricket match between Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, I go and have a bet with one of my friends. I am saying Sri Lanka will win. So if Sri Lanka loses the match, I'm going to lose. I have a risk. My risk is in the event Sri Lanka loses, I'm going to lose. So to mitigate that risk, I have a hedging arrangement. The hedging arrangement is I'll go to another friend of mine and have another bet where I say Bangladesh will win. What happens now? At the end of the match, whoever wins, I'm not going to lose, because whenever I lose from one side, I'm gaining from the other. So that is the basic mechanism of hedging. Then we have market risk limits. So market risk limits, that is again, what you do is you define your limit where you are absorbing risk. We sometimes call it stop loss limit also. What happens is, let's say you have invested in shares, let's say 100 rupees, and you want to sell these shares in the market and earn a profit. That is what you are looking at. If it is 110 or 120, so you will be gaining. But if the market prices go down, you are going to lose. So what you do is you define a loss limit. The loss limit, let's say the maximum loss is 10 rupees or 10%. What does that mean? So I have bought the shares at 100 rupees. The maximum loss I am willing to take is 10. That means I don't mind selling it at 90. That's what it means. So you set this loss limit, and the moment the market price goes down to 90, you sell it. You don't wait till it goes further down. So if you wait till it goes to 80, you are losing 20. So your stop loss limit is to minimize the damage. You say when it reaches 90, sell it and stop the loss going further. Then we have diversification. Diversification we have discussed several times. Therefore, I think most of you all know. But let me highlight few aspects in that you need to pay attention to. Diversification, sometimes we misinterpret. Diversification is not necessarily having a collection of assets. No. A pool of assets or collection of assets is not diversification. Diversification is a strategy to construct a portfolio of assets. So you need to combine a portfolio of assets in order to reduce what we call unsystematic risk. Unsystematic risk. That means the risks that are unique or individually affecting the instruments. You cannot reduce the systematic risk by creating a portfolio, because those risks affects the entire industry or the system as a whole. So by creating a portfolio within that system, you can't eliminate the systematic risk. So you are trying to eliminate unsystematic risk that is diversifiable. So the idea of diversification is you create a portfolio with mitigating impact or diversification impact. So how do you do that? The returns of the instrument should technically move in the opposite direction to get the best advantage of diversification. So we call it the relationship or the correlation should be negative. That means when the return of one instrument goes up, the return of another goes down. So the most popular example we take in diversification is ice cream and umbrella, right? Ice cream and umbrella. So what happens when there's rainy season, the umbrella business goes up, ice cream business goes down. That means it works in the opposite direction, right? That is negative correlation. Then there is another technique called high frequency trading, which is not available in our part of the world. What happens is that this trading in developed markets take place very fast. The prices of financial instruments and derivatives changes less than a second, within less than a second, right? These price movements are very fast. So what this high frequency trading does is it runs certain predictions based on the historical data, and they give you outcomes what would be the possible spot for you to go and invest by analyzing this. So then your investment operation is very fast, high frequency trading. You buy and sell, buy and sell. Sometimes these are mostly handled through computers and advanced electronic platforms for you to avoid the exposures. So that is not available in the Sri Lankan market. These are mostly in the developed market. So then I have explained all these. I will not take time to go through each and every one. Right? I have discussed. Then we discuss the market risk management function. So technically, you should be having a separate market risk management function in your bank or organization, because that is quite significant in managing it. So it includes these features, what you can see. Ownership. So this function will own the market risk management policy, like we discussed earlier about the credit risk management function. So they own that policy. Likewise, this function will own this policy. Then proactive management involvement in market issues. So this function has to get involved proactively to deal with those risks. Then you have to define escalation procedures to deal with rising levels of trading loss and market risk limit breaches. Now, escalation procedures, I'm not sure that I have discussed this before. The escalation is, in simple terms, communication. But this communication is different. This escalation always happens to the next level. You report to the next level, right? It keeps on going up in the ladder. So you escalate, you communicate to the next level about something of importance, a breach or risk that those people should be aware and probably are responsible to take decisions as well. So this function is to define the escalation procedure. So for example, trading losses, you can define different levels of trading losses. If the trading losses reach this level, there has to be an escalation to the head of the unit. So if this goes beyond this level, it has to go to another particular level, or maybe the CEO. Or if it goes beyond a certain level, it goes to the board. Likewise, you have to define those escalation procedures. There you have to indicate the matter, the impact, and also you might highlight the mitigating measures or actions taken to rectify or will be taken to rectify. So then the party, whoever is receiving it, has a complete picture of the matter. So the same thing is applied to losses, as well as when you define the risk limit, that there are breaches, you've got the same thing. An independent validation of market pricing. So there's a concept called value at risk. That is the risk limit that you define as the maximum loss an organization can take. Right, so then those loss limits, whether those are adequate, depending on the market pricing mechanism work. And also, when you use value at risk, that is defining these loss limits, you should not use them alone. Because when you define a loss limit, there can be different scenarios and situations. So this can vary depending on that. That's why this suggests when you do VR, value at risk models, you need to also use stress testing and scenario testing to the model to be clear that when there are gaps, when there are shocks, these models are capable of accommodating them without a collapse. And then you can also look at independent daily monitoring, right? So you can do independent daily monitoring using various channels, departments, and positions, collect the information and monitor them based on the requirements. Then we talk about market data. Right? So when you say market data, what we are talking about is we use market data to analyze market risk. Now, when you want to analyze or mitigate market risk, you need market data and you need certain parameters, indicators. However, the problem is most of the time this market data is available in large volumes because we are looking about a lot of data points. So in such a situation, it is not practical to evaluate entire lot of data, the entire population, and come to conclusions because it's practically not possible. So therefore, what the organizations do is you get a sample that represents the population or the total. From the total data sets, you pick a sample and then test the sample. Test the sample, evaluate the sample, and then based on the outcome of the sample, you come to conclusions about the population. So that is called making inference. So making an inference means coming to a conclusion about the population based on the findings of the sample. Then we discuss two technical terms: population and sample. So some of you may have already heard this and gone through some statistical courses. So what does it mean? Population in very simple terms is the entire data set, right? The total data set that is available for a given variable. Let's say you have 1,000 people in a hall. So this entire 1,000 people is your population, the entire crowd coming under that. Now, a sample is a portion of that population, but it's not just a portion, it is a portion of population that represents the characteristics of population. Let's say you have 1,000 people in a hall, and there you have 600 men and 400 women. You take 50 men out of that and take it as a sample. That is not a sample, because taking 50 out of 1,000 is not just a mathematical thing. It should represent the population. We know the population represents female as well. So therefore, technically, you should have taken in proportion. Right? To represent both, you have to take the sample. So that's the idea. Sample is a subset of the population. It represents the population, and it has to be extracted with those criteria. So when you talk about sample, there are three things you need to know. That is called, one is called the typical value. Oh, that is the number that represents the sample. So we call it a central tendency measure. So you take the central tendency measure there. Then we need to know, once we know the typical value of the central tendency, let's say I'm talking about the people in the room. I want to look at the age. So the typical value is that what would be the rough age that I would consider for this population? And one say it's 40, right? 40-year-old. So the 40 is a representative number or the typical value of that population. Sorry, of that sample, right? Then the dispersion, the variation. So, okay, I consider 40 as a central tendency or the typical value. Then what would be the deviation? Not everyone is at 40, right? Some are at 28, some are at 30, some are at 45, some are at 50. So you can have different. So then we need to know what is the average distance between this typical value and the rest of the numbers, the variation. Then these two numbers, the typical value and the dispersion, will help you to derive the two measures, the typical value and dispersion of the population. Now, therefore, when you use these two, you need to make sure that your sample is a clear representative sample of the population, right? So that means how closely our sample mirror the properties or the characteristics of the population, right? So that is something that you need to know, right? So in simple terms, this is depiction of the central tendency and dispersion. So most of you may know this. This is called the normal distribution, right? From this point onwards, we're discussing about statistics rather, right? These concepts are coming in statistics. So the central tendency of the typical value represents the sample as a single value. So what is in the middle is what we call, this left side, right? The axis. You have two axes here, right? You have this side, the volume or the number of occurrences. This side are the values, right? So here, if you take, you can have a value here, let's say X or 10, and this indicates the volume of 10. That means this is the highest volume number, right? Most number of occurrences. Now, then the other side, the gap, right, from left to right, this represents the dispersion or the deviation from the typical value. So we'll be discussing in detail about these central tendency measures and dispersion measures and how to calculate this and how to arrive at the numbers with examples after this. So any questions or clarifications up to this point? Right. So if you don't have any questions and clarification, I want you to excuse me today a little early, about 5 minutes early now. I have another quick engagement at sharp 9:30. I need to get into that. So with that, I'm concluding today's session. So we are going to discuss the rest of the statistical topics next week onward, right? So next week we are discussing the rest. So we'll come prepared. And with that, if you don't have any further clarifications or questions, that's it for today. Stay safe and good night.
Thank you, sir.
Well done, sir.